Our series here is Coming Alive. Coming Alive, this is about spiritual formation. This is about spiritual formations of our lives and hearts. There's a lot of ways we do that. We go ahead and put the 6 ways up there, Brian, if you don't mind. We've talked about most of these. And I mean, you have no excuse, church. Here are all the ways God is speaking, proclaiming himself. There's nature, there's the Bible, he's speaking to us through his Son, the Lord Jesus, through our own experiences, through that still small voice. He's speaking to us, we're going to look at today, through other people. I mean, lots of voices if we'll tune in and we'll allow our heart to be a vessel, a repository of this good news that he's trying to give us. Okay? Shape our soul in that way. God is speaking. Now, if you want to continue this, we're going to have this series. It's going to finish at the end of next week, but it's in some ways, it's just beginning. And so one of the ways you might want to follow up is to grab a book on spiritual growth, and we brought the library down into the foyer. Okay, so we've got a box of books out there, and Larry Frankie, the guy with the Hawaiian shirt, he specifically wore a Hawaiian shirt today so we could identify him. I'm hoping he's the only Hawaiian shirt. Yeah, John doesn't have his on today. So, all right. So, oh no, don't get him mixed up with Bert. He's got his on. We thought, well, surely there won't be one more than, well, here we go. But anyway, look for Larry. Check out a book on spiritual growth and on keeping this going in your own heart. God is wisely speaking through other people. And, I know he does that through husband and wife. We know it happens through our elders, and they speak into our lives. Sometimes it happens from the preacher. We hope it happens. When something good happens there, and we go, oh, that's a word from the Lord. Those are all expected ways. Today I want to talk about this for just a few minutes from the unexpected ways that God speaks. This is in Nashville, Tennessee. The fellow who's playing the guitar, his name's Carlos Whittaker. Carlos is a songwriter and a worship leader. He went out to a Nashville park on an early Saturday morning and it was very cold, and has got his whole crew there to record a song, The God of Second Chances, and this is what happens.
Yeah. You're the God of all the ages. You were we that you would save us. We're in awe before you now.
Yo, what's happening right now is incredible. We're shooting the Carlos EPK, and he's singing his song called God of Second Chances. And a homeless man just came down and started kneeling, and he's crying to the song.
One God, one creator, yes, one Father.
Do you hear him? Oh, he's singing reggae.
One creator, yes, one Father.
Yes. I have never. Yes. In a really bad neighborhood.
Right after. Okay, here we go. You're the God of second chances.
No, Carlos is singing it on the guitar. Can you hear him? And the homeless man is gonna do reggae.
You're the God of all the ages.
Let me let you go, okay?
Who are we that you would save us? We're in awe before you now, and our hearts are bowing down. Go. One God, one creator, yes, one Father. Put a bite, say one God, one creator, yes, one Father. Put a bite. I may say, Jaja make me walk, Jaja make me talk, Jaja make the birdie fly the dog that bark. I sit on the walk, I'm back to carry cock, and all these that I may say, clauses, clap your tiny hands for joy, clap your tiny hands for joy, clap your tiny hands for joy, clap your tiny hands for joy. The Holy Ghost power is moving just like a magnet. Bundle, I said the Holy Ghost power is moving just like a magnet. Bundle, I said it's moving here, it's moving there, it's moving all over the atmosphere. Holy Ghost power is moving just like a magnet. Hey. You're the God of second chances. You're the God who still romances. Hey. We're in awe before you now, and our hearts are bowing down. You're the God of all the ages. Who are we that you would save us? We're in awe before you now. our hearts are bowing down. I am on my way to heaven.
Didn't you love that encounter? Wasn't that awesome? Now, let's see if we can get our heads around this. So often we approach people with the idea of transaction. That is, I pay my money, I get my Diet Coke. Okay, I pay my money, I get my groceries, whatever. Sometimes, as Christians, we talk about mission. That is, I've got to give you something. The gospel, the good news, clothing, something at Christmas. It turns into charity. It's in the Bible. It's okay. We've got transaction, we've got mission. But what I want us to see today, I think there is a third way that I would like for us to view our encounters with people, and that is through relationship. And with relationship, there is reciprocity. Believing that every human being, not only may they need something, but they have something to give you. They have something to offer you. And that when you begin to open yourselves to this framework, to this way of looking at life, at reality, that what happens is in that relationship, God's grace works in this interaction. So that I go into the relationship anticipating how God's grace is going to be real and alive and giving in every human interaction. What a way, what an opportunity if we could begin to see our lives in this way. Let's read the passage from Hebrews chapter 13 again and think of it for just a minute. Go ahead and put it up there, if you don't mind, Jeff. Keep on loving one another as brothers and sisters. This is coming to a church that was discouraged and wanted to regress in their faith and maybe wanted to give up on church. Some of them didn't want to meet anymore. Some of them were falling back into their old ways and their old habits of the sinful flesh habits, but their old traditions. And they were, and the author is trying to call them out of that to live in grace and encourage one another. Keep on loving one another, and do not forget to show hospitality to strangers. For by so doing, some people have shown hospitality to angels. Now, what is he talking about? Well, the word angels and the word messengers are the same word. So what I think the author is trying to get us to see is that in these interactions where we open ourselves up to someone else, there is, yes, us giving to them or us receiving them into our homes. And this was a core value of almost all cultures in the world. Okay? This was true in Egypt. This was true in ancient Mesopotamia. This was true. The Bedouins had here these people were traveling around in tents, and yet if somebody would come by, they knew they needed to welcome them in. It was a bedrock core value in their society. In fact, there's a Jewish proverb that says hospitality is a form of worship. Think about it. And that's the reason we have passages, not just like this one, but all over the Bible. Go ahead and put up the 1 Timothy passage, Jeff, because this is about the overseer or the shepherd or the elder. Is to be above reproach, faithful to his wife, temperate, self-controlled or self-respectable, hospitable, and able to teach. That's our leadership. That needs to be a mark and a characteristic of our leadership, but not just the leadership. Go ahead to the next passage. How about this one from Romans 12? Share with the Lord's people who are in need. Practice hospitality. It's a discipline. It's something we have to learn. Okay, 1 Peter 4, if you want to hear it from Peter's perspective, offer hospitality to one another without grumbling. What is this hospitality? It's the word philoxenia. It means opening oneself up to the stranger. And the point I'm trying to make today and help us think about is while we open ourselves up to the stranger, what is it that the stranger has to give to us that might be a message from the Lord? Because here's the latter part of the text. It says this, for by doing so, some have unwittingly entertained angels or messengers. If we listen to God wisely, speak this way, I think there are a couple of considerations. One is this: welcome the blessing in giving. Okay, there is a blessing in giving. Doesn't the Bible teach that? It is more blessed to give than to receive. Now, I don't know that I always get it. I really like to receive things. Okay, I'm all about receiving sometimes. And so I'm not sure I 100% understand this one, but I believe what he's trying to drive at is that by giving, we are imitating the Lord himself, taking on his way and his character and his sacrifice, and that is a blessing when we're imitating the Lord. And so I want to maybe just stop right at a moment right here and say some of you today are lonely, or you're feeling a little estranged, or you're feeling some self-pity, or you've been grumbling, or you're depressed. And I want to suggest to you that the way out of that is to follow the Lord and to give yourself to another human being. Okay? So we welcome the blessing in giving, but I don't want us to stop there in this morning's lesson. I want us to think about it this way. In welcoming the stranger, expect to receive a message from God. Jeff? Or a gift from God. In other words, they have something to give you. Now, think about, for just a minute, there was Carlos and there was Danny. Carlos with the guitar, and Danny that comes up, the homeless man. Who was the host and who was the guest? Well, it appeared as though Carlos is the host and the guest comes up, but suddenly the guest has something to give. Who do you think got more out of this encounter? Hey, why do you think Carlos has it up on his YouTube, on his blog site? Because it was life-changing for him in encountering Danny. And you can read all the details out there on the site on just how it was pivotal in shaping his mindset about what he was doing and about the way God can ordain and work things out. Of how God's grace comes in surprising places. And in fact, we didn't get to see the very end of the video, but at the very end of the video, he says, Carlos says something a little shaky, like, I hope things go right for you. And Danny says, things are going right. In other words, I'm in the Lord and it's already going right. So I want us to take that impression and that picture, and I want you to translate that into your interactions with people so that you would see and are seeing how is God at work? How is his mercy? How is his grace? How is he bringing about his glory through this interaction? Let me give you an example of this from Luke chapter 24 in verse 28 and 31. This is the story on the road to Emmaus. Now, in this scene, Jesus is walking with a couple of these disciples, but they don't recognize Jesus. And as they approach so Jesus is a stranger, right? And as they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going farther. But they urged him strongly, stay with us, This is an act of hospitality on their part. They're welcoming in the stranger. For it is nearly evening, the day is almost over. And so he went to stay with them. And when he was at the table, he took bread, and he gave thanks, and he broke it. This is the stranger does this. And he began to give it to them. And then what does the text say? Then their eyes were opened, and they recognized him. And then he disappeared from their sight. They offered the hospitality, and yet they were the ones who were the recipients of the gift. And I want to suggest that that can happen again and again in our lives as well. That we move beyond transaction, even beyond the idea of being the helper or mission, to a relationship and looking for the divine encounter in every human relationship. The hospitality, the classic definition, and let's broaden it just a bit, is from inviting somebody in to opening up yourself to another, awaiting God's grace. And so whether it is family and it's a cousin or it's an uncle or as a brother, would you have the courage by faith to see differently and to see your neighbors differently, to see the waitress differently, to see the clerk differently, to, if you're in a medical field, to see your patients differently, how much they might have to offer you. It's the same concept and the same idea that's in Matthew chapter 25 in the story of the sheep and the goats, and the one that formed Mother Teresa's life when she said, whatever you do to the, Jesus said this, but she took it on, whatever you do to the least of these, you do it unto me. You do it unto me. Every act of extending yourself to another, you see that person? That's Christ himself. You begin to treat people that way, imagine what you will also then begin to see and receive. Divine encounter. I'm going to ask Brett to come up here to help me in the closing illustration this morning. And we got together for lunch a week ago, Saturday. And Brett was just sharing an encounter that he had a little over a year ago. And I wanted him to just tell some of the details of that as we think about opening ourselves up to others and then what we also might learn from that. So just by way of background, Brett, tell a little bit about where you work and what you do there.
I work as a nurse practitioner, which we essentially do a lot of the same medical stuff that doctors do, but we're limited in some of our scope.
They just pay you less, right?
A lot less.
Okay.
And I work at a local prison here in Missouri.
Okay. And tell a little bit about the background on the patient that you encountered and your discussion about their diagnosis.
One of my duties at the prison is to take care of what's called chronic care. You follow patients that have a chronic disease. You follow that disease, and you make sure that there's not progressing, there have been no changes in that condition, and you can continue to treat it. I had a patient who was in for a life sentence. So we were following him, and he had a previous cancer of the colon, and had it taken care of. We had removed it. He received chemotherapy. And this had been about 2 years before I encountered him. And he was doing fine at one point. When I first encountered him, he was doing fine. As I continued to follow him, he began to have some complaints that were concerning some blood in the stool, and he'd also had some abdominal pain that we were concerned about. And we started working him up for additional cancers. Eventually, we had done an MRI because of the additional complaints of pain in strategic areas. he ended up having a reoccurrence of the cancer in his colon, and it had spread to the bone and to the lungs at that time, and it spread really quickly. It had been aggressive. Within 6 months. It had gone from not even being able to find any symptoms of it to what we call pan-global, which is all over.
So after that you informed him of the cancer and he understood how serious and grave it was, what did he tell you?
Just after we had done the MRI, he went back to his home county, which is in the southern part of the state, and had some court dates. We weren't sure what it was all about, but he went back to his home county. Anyway, I informed him that he had of this diagnosis that it had spread, and that this would probably take his life. Unless he had some kind of serious accident, this would take his life in less than 9 months. Also explained to him that, we can treat it to prolong your life and to make life a little bit more comfortable. And he decided not to have not to have any kind of treatment, and he didn't want any kind of pain medication. In our conversation that we had at that point, he went on to tell me that the reason I went back to my home county was I had just confessed to the murders rapes, murders, and torture of 12 small little girls. His exact words were, "I hurt those girls real bad." And he began to tell me why he didn't want treatment for this cancer, which I said, it's your option not to have treatment, but I wanted to expound on that. And he told me that he felt that this was God's punishment for him. I had known this before. A little bit more background. Before I had encountered this gentleman for this encounter, I had seen him around the prison. He had led Bible studies. He had a Bible study that he led actually in his cell. He also had he was part of the chaplain service, and was well versed and was well aware that God had saved him and that he had formed a relationship with Christ that I felt was genuine. When he said that he felt like this was God's punishment for him, this diagnosis was God's punishment for him, and that he didn't want anything because this was his punishment, and that he would spend the rest of he would spend eternity in hell because of the things that he's done. I began to have a conversation with him, and I began to say things that I've never articulated before. But I told him, I know that there's grace. I know that there's redemption for all, no matter what you've done. And I also know that my sin is just as black to God as the sins that you've committed. There is no difference between a little white lie and the rape and murder of a small child. It's all black to God. God hates it. And that, but we're all forgiven, and grace covers everything, because that's what grace does, no matter what we've done.
One of the things that Brett then shared with me was the way that encounter, which I think fits so close to the one here with Carlos and Danny this morning, and really the essence of what we're trying to get in Hebrews 13, is that encounter has shaped the way he's thought and his activities and his understanding for a year plus now. Say a little bit about that.
Well, first of all, God has a way of making your own words convict you. And this one was a hard one, because I have to look at sin different now. My sin is just as black as him. That's offensive. The gospel of Jesus is offensive. It tells me that me trying to make my behavior good enough to be accepted by Christ is not going to get it. It's all going to be covered by grace. My sin is just as black as his. There's no hierarchy within church of what we've done, and the type of sinner that we're all just in this together. Everything I've read, everything I've looked at, and in the last 18 months have focused right back on this conversation and used my words to convict me. I've learned that. I've learned that we're both, in my reading, it hit one of the things that one of the authors was saying hit me that went right back to this conversation. We are both saint and sinner at the same time. God was both human and God. Jesus was both human and God at the same time. And we are encountering that in our own life. We have the struggle going on with us, and we have the presence of God within us, and that's just overwhelming. One thing that I've learned from this is I've got to learn to forgive myself. If grace can cover that kind of sin, then I need to forgive myself because God's already taken care of it.
Thank you, Brad.
Thank you.
Let's give Brad a round of applause. Thank you for sharing. Let's stand. We're going to have a closing song, and I just want to put the final challenge to you this morning. God is wisely speaking through others, and I think in unexpected ways. I hope you'll anticipate that this week. And as I've asked repeatedly in this series, and I'll ask it again today, are you actively listening to his voice?